Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Learn at Lunch webinar. We're coming to you live today to talk about what's unique about ministerial compensation hosted by Church Benefits Board. Please note that this session is being recorded, and at the end of the presentation, we'll stop the recording and we'll open things up for Q&A together. We are so delighted to be joined again by our guest presenter, Amy Artiga. Amy is a longtime friend. She's a trusted partner of Church Benefits Board. She's basically Superwoman. She's a mom, a wife, an author, a speaker. She does all these things, and she brings this incredible depth of professional expertise as a certified financial planner and a certified kingdom advisor. She holds degrees in financial planning, business, theology. She serves as a faculty member for our CBB-sponsored financial wellness education events that we fondly call FWEs. Amy, welcome back. We're so glad you're here with us. We're grateful for your partnership and excited to learn more from you today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'll just point out this disclaimer real quick. This is education, not advice. So this webinar is for educational purposes, but if you want specific advice for your specific situation, you'll want to talk to your own financial, tax, or legal professional. This is only education. So next slide. As a starting point, I'm just going to do a brief summary of clergy taxation. We talked about this in last month's webinar, but in order to understand some of today's material, you need just a brief summary here. So there's three main types of taxes that you pay based on your income. The first one is your income taxes, and then there's Social Security and Medicare taxes. Now, these are really important because this is something everyone pays out of their income, but not everyone is really aware of the Social Security and Medicare taxes, especially because usually that's just taken directly out of your paycheck. However, clergy has a very unique situation where you're considered dual status taxpayers. What that means is that you pay your income taxes as if you're an employee. If you work at a church, you get paid by W-2, you get paid as an employee, and so you pay income taxes as an employee. And then even though you are an employee, for all intents and purposes, you're an employee, you still have to pay your Social Security and Medicare taxes as if you're self-employed. So just a brief summary of what they are. So income taxes, these are the ones that change based on your income level, and there's different brackets going from 0%, which is your standard deduction or your itemized deduction, then there's 10, 12, all the way up to 37%. And so the more money you earn, the higher taxes you pay for income taxes. And these can be withheld from your paycheck. Your church is allowed to withhold these. Other employers are required to withhold income taxes from paychecks, but churches, it's actually optional. And so they can withhold them. And if they don't, then you have to pay quarterly estimated payments in order to get that money to the IRS throughout the year. In these income taxes, this is what you calculate on Form 1040 during tax season. So right now, if you're filing your taxes, you're filling out Form 1040 and calculating your income taxes. Now, Social Security and Medicare taxes, technically there's two separate taxes, but they always get lumped together because you pay them the same way and they function rather similarly. And so it's kind of a separate thing. And so Social Security and Medicare taxes, they're also called payroll taxes or SECA or FICA. So all of those different names you may hear all mean Social Security and Medicare taxes. And unlike income taxes that have different tax brackets depending on how much you earn, Social Security and Medicare taxes are just a flat rate for it doesn't matter how much you earn, whether you earn $1 or $100,000, you're paying the same rate. And this is where you pay as if you're self-employed. Now, traditional employees, they pay half of these taxes and their employer pays half. So if I'm an employee at Walmart, I will pay 7.65% of my income, and then Walmart will pay 7.65% of my income as well to cover these taxes. But self-employed people are both the employee and the employer, so they pay both together for a total of 15.3% of income. And then clergy, because of all the unique tax rules, you pay these as if you're self-employed. And so you do pay the full 15.3% if you haven't opted out of Social Security. And churches are not allowed to withhold these taxes from your paycheck. And so these you have to pay by quarterly estimated payments, or you can actually have your church withhold extra income taxes to cover the difference, because when you file your taxes, it's all lumped together and for one tax bill. So you can have them withhold extra income taxes, but legally churches are not allowed to withhold Social Security and Medicare taxes for clergy. And so the way you pay that and the way you calculate it is on Schedule SE when you file your tax return. And so that's something that an employee at Walmart, to follow my example, they never see their Social Security and Medicare taxes being paid. It's just a line on their pay stub that's going out. Whereas as clergy, you're calculating those on Schedule SE, and so you're seeing exactly what you're paying. Now we'll move on from taxes to ministerial compensation. Now, there's two basic kinds of ministerial compensation. There's income, which is money that comes to you, and then there's benefits, which is something that you benefit from, but it's not actual cash. And then on here, I also have reimbursements, which technically isn't compensation because you didn't earn that. You're just being reimbursed for something, but we'll touch on that at the end just because it is kind of a factor in this that you should be aware of. And so looking at ministerial income, we'll do the next slide. There's 4 different types of ministerial income that you can have. The first one is your salary. And this is just the typical, if you work at Walmart as well, you'll get a salary. This is just your pay. And this is fully taxed. So you pay income taxes, you pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on this. And this is something where a lot of ministers, you get your new job, you answer your call, you say, okay, this is what we're going to pay you for salary. You say, oh, great, thank you. And you budget, and then you live that, and then you get paid that every year and every year. In 5 years down the road, you're still getting the same pay and the same salary as you were when you were initially hired. However, inflation has gone up a lot, and so that salary isn't going as far. And so when we talk about salary, I always like to mention it's important when you're negotiating your salary to negotiate for cost of living increases. And that's just an increase that goes along with inflation so that your salary can still buy the same amount of things that it's currently buying. And that's different than a merit increase. A merit increase would be maybe you get more responsibility or you get a new degree or some kind of education where you have done something specifically to where you deserve more money. And so that's the difference between a cost of living increase and a merit increase. The cost of living increase is just based on inflation and how the cost of living has changed, whereas a merit increase is based on you providing more value to the organization. And so a lot of ministers don't get any kind of increases in their salary, but it's really good to get them, as you probably know, because you're the one getting that salary. But I would encourage you to recognize the difference between cost of living and merit increase, and then negotiate to be able to receive both. The merit increase depending on what you've done to earn it, but then cost of living just is an annual thing so that your salary can keep up with inflation. And if your church says, well, how do we know what to increase it by? How do we know inflation? How do we make that decision? There's actually a really easy thing you can do, and that's just match the Social Security Administration's cost of living raise. Because every year the Social Security Administration will calculate inflation. They have their whole equation they do to calculate, and then they increase everyone's Social Security benefits. So last year they increased it by 2.8% because based on their calculations, the cost of living had gone up 2.8%. So if your church wants to organize and have a cost of living increase every year, just so that your salary keeps pace with inflation, they can just look at the Social Security Administration and say, okay, whatever they're doing, we're doing. And it's a really easy way for them to do it. And then your salary can keep pace with inflation. So that salary, it's fully taxable, just like a secular salary you might earn. The next one we have on here is your Social Security and Medicare offset. Now, we just talked about how clergy are dual status taxpayers, and you have to pay both the employee and employer portions of Social Security and Medicare. And so you're paying twice as much as other employees. And so some churches want to help with that. And so they will give you some extra income to help cover the cost of the taxes that employers usually pay. Now, well, you might call it a Social Security and Medicare offset. The IRS just sees it as additional income. So this is taxed as salary for you. So it's subject to income taxes and it's subject to Social Security and Medicare taxes. And so technically this actually increases your Social Security and Medicare taxes that they're trying to offset. And I've heard from different people say, well, how do you calculate that? Because if we just do 7.65% of the salary, then it's actually more because, that increases it. And you can do, if you want to do really complicated calculations to get it exact, go ahead. If you just want to do 7.65% of the base salary, anyway, it's extra income to help you pay your taxes. And so I would say don't stress over the calculations and be grateful if you get this, because a lot of pastors don't get this. They're just paying everything out of pocket, that full 15.3% of taxes. And so a Social Security and Medicare offset is a great way for your church to recognize your extra tax burden and help you out with it. But the IRS does see it as just plain old income and taxes it as such. Next thing we have on here is the housing allowance. In last month's webinar, we talked a lot about the housing allowance. And so if you want more information, if you want to go into more depth, then I encourage you to watch that webinar. It's available on the CVB website, and I think they're going to put a link in the chat for you. But it's lots of information. I spoke really, really fast to get as much information in as possible for the webinar, so you can always watch it at a slower speed if you want. But there's a lot there that I'm not going to be covering today. But the housing allowance is a form of income because it's money that your church pays to you, but it's unique because it's exempt from income taxes. So those income taxes with the tax brackets of 10, 12, 22, 24%, you don't have to pay any income taxes on your housing allowance. However, it's important to note that you do still have to pay Social Security and Medicare taxes. So it's only exempt from income taxes, and that's federal income taxes and most state income taxes. I know Pennsylvania still taxes the housing allowance. I don't know of any other states that do. So I'm sorry if you live in Pennsylvania, but at least you still get a federal tax break. So the housing allowance is exempt from federal taxation, but you do still pay Social Security and Medicare taxes. And so that's the unique aspect of that. And the way it's paid is just as cash along with your salary. So if you have direct deposit, you won't notice any difference in your bank account. It'll still be the same total, but on your pay stub, it will say salary and it will say housing allowance, and then it'll be taxed differently. The last type of income you can receive is an equity allowance. Now, this is probably the least familiar to you because this is only really applicable for people who live in a parsonage. What happens with a lot of us is that we become adults, we get a job, we start a family, we buy a house, and then we pay off our mortgage over the next 30 years. And as we're paying off the mortgage, not only are we gaining more ownership of our house, but the house usually goes up in value. I know where I live here, I just bought my house almost a year ago, and over the last 5 or 6 years, the home values doubled. And so a house that was worth $200,000 is now worth $400,000. And so real estate, sometimes the values come down, which actually where I am right now, they are coming down a little bit. But in general, over the long term, real estate usually appreciates in value. And so houses increase in value. So what happens is you might buy a $200,000 house when you're 30 years old. And then by the time you're retiring age 65, it might be worth $500,000. And so you've built wealth without even really thinking about it, just because you own that home you're living in. Now, the problem with people who live in a parsonage is that they don't have the opportunity to build that home equity. Maybe you go into the ministry at age 30 and you move into a parsonage, and then you retire at age 65, you don't have a house. And so where all your peers have this house that has increased in value incredibly, all of a sudden you don't have a home and you need to start from scratch as far as housing is concerned. And so a lot of churches see this and feel like it's not very fair for pastors, or they're at a disadvantage in that way. And so they'll provide what's called an equity allowance. And basically, this is just extra income to account for the fact that they don't have home equity that they're building. And if your church pays this to you as cash, then in the IRS's eyes, it's just additional income. It's taxable just like your salary. But there's something your church can do to make this more tax advantaged. And they can put this money into your 403B plan. In that way, it's not taxed to you as they're putting it in, and you don't have to pay those Social Security and Medicare taxes. And then once you retire, you can take the money out of your 403B and use it for housing. And so that's a way where you can save on taxes and have the equity allowance. Because if you're going to have your whole career living in a parsonage, it's not until you retire anyway that you need that home. And so you can pull the equity allowance out of your 403B in order to pay for the home that you're going to retire in and live to retirement. And so that's what an equity allowance is. It's something for pastors that are living in a parsonage that just helps them to have money set aside to have a place to live when they retire, because otherwise, they're starting from scratch, whereas all their peers who weren't in a parsonage might have big paid off homes that have doubled or tripled in value since they bought them. And so that's the different kinds of ministerial income. That's all different kinds of money that your church pays to you. But compensation goes a lot further than just cash. There are a lot of things your church can do for you that it's not cash in your hand, but it's definitely worth cash because it's a huge benefit to you. And some of these ministerial benefits are really expensive to purchase on your own, so it's much better to get them through your church. Some of them you can go either way, it doesn't make a huge difference, but some of them are extra valuable through your church just because they're so much more expensive to purchase on your own. And the first one we have here is healthcare. So this would be medical insurance is the biggest one. And this is one where it's great if you can get it through your church, because if you can't get it through your church, then you'll be looking at your state exchange, which you can get subsidies for that from the government. Or there's medical sharing ministries available, which they are not technically insurance, but they are a way that some people use to pay for medical expenses. If you are looking into one of those, then you have to be very careful about the fine print because it's different than insurance and they're all different. And so getting medical insurance through your church is a huge benefit. And when your church purchases the medical insurance, then all of the premiums you pay are tax-free. Whereas if you purchase a policy on the exchange, you're paying for all of that with after-tax dollars. And one quick note, if you do purchase health insurance on the exchange, your subsidy from the government is based on your income. And one good thing for ministers is your housing allowance does not count as income for those calculations. And so in that way, you are usually eligible for a higher subsidy than if you were in ministry. So that's one benefit there if you do have to purchase your own insurance. Also, if your income's low enough for Medicaid, which is the state insurance for low-income people, then that also does not include the housing allowance. So I know there are a lot of ministers with fairly low incomes, or they have children that are on state insurance because the housing allowance doesn't count, and so they're able to get that. But as a church benefit, health insurance is huge and incredibly beneficial because everyone really should have health insurance, and it can be expensive to get on your own. The next one under the health category would be dental insurance. Now, this is one that a lot of employers will offer. It's usually very cheap, doesn't cost a lot, and if your employer offers it, it's a great benefit. Go ahead and take them up on it. But this is a benefit where if you don't have dental insurance, you don't need to go purchase it on your own. I would tell you go purchase medical insurance. You need to have medical insurance. And the reason for that is that medical insurance policies have an out-of-pocket maximum, which means you do have to pay for some things, but once you reach a certain point, the insurance company will pay for everything. So with some policies, it's as low as $3,000. With others, it's more like $16,000. But the nice thing is once you reach that out-of-pocket maximum for the year, your insurance company will pay everything else. And this is why having medical insurance is so important, because if you have a big event, some catastrophic event that costs $500,000, you're only going to pay your out-of-pocket maximum, and the insurance company pays the rest. Now, dental insurance works the opposite. They just have a set benefit they'll pay per year, which is often $1,000 or $1,500, and anything more you have to pay is all something you pay out of pocket. So for that reason, dental insurance isn't as valuable. And so if you get it through your church, that's great. Take advantage of it. But if you don't, it's nothing to lose sleep over. Just ask your dentist if they have a cash pay plan or something like that. You don't need to purchase this insurance on your own. But medical insurance is important. So if you're going to be, pushing your church to get something, medical insurance is something worth pushing for. Dental insurance, not so much. And then another one that falls under healthcare is vision insurance. And this is one where, kind of like dental, it's a great benefit if you have it, but if you don't have it, you don't really need to go out and buy a policy. You can usually get eye exams through your medical insurance, and then you can buy glasses, cheap online it's not that bad. But the actual medical insurance for hospital stays and doctor visits, that is very, very important. So you should have it, and hopefully your church can provide it, because then it's tax-free for you. Now, there are some things related to medical insurance that your church could have as benefits. And one of them is a health reimbursement arrangement. And what this is, it's for churches that don't offer medical insurance usually. And so their employees have to go purchase it on their own, but they'll have this arrangement where they say, oh, we'll reimburse you up to a certain amount of medical expenses. And if it's set up as a health reimbursement arrangement according to IRS guidelines, then anything they reimburse you is tax-free. You don't have to pay taxes. It's not considered income. It's a tax-free reimbursement. Now, one thing to note with this is if you do have one of those, whatever you get in a reimbursement will lower your government subsidy, your premium tax credit from buying insurance on the exchange. And so it's important to know that you probably won't see a huge difference. It's just the church is paying you rather than the government paying you. And with those, your church has to provide it equally. So they can't just offer it to the pastor. They have to provide it to all of their employees. Now, one thing that's really helpful to note when it comes to health expenses is the difference between a stipend and a reimbursement, because some employers will offer a healthcare stipend, meaning we'll give you a little bit of extra money to go towards your healthcare costs since we're not providing insurance. And a stipend is taxable income, whereas a reimbursement is tax-free. And so it's good to know that vocabulary, because if you're being reimbursed $10,000, you don't pay any taxes on that. Whereas if you're being paid a $10,000 stipend, that's all taxable. And so your taxes are going up with that. Another thing that might be available to you through your employer, if you have a high deductible health plan, is a health savings account. And what this is it's an account where you can put money pre-tax into the account and then take it out tax-free for medical expenses. And also you can put the money in and leave it there, and it builds year over year. And so if you have a high deductible health plan, whether through your employer or from the exchange, I highly recommend having a health savings account, because it's a great tax benefit. You can have completely tax-free medical expense payments with the way it works. And the nice thing is it builds year over year. So some people that don't have a lot of medical expenses will actually put the maximum per year in there, which this year for a family, it's over $8,000. So you can't put $100,000 in there, though. You probably don't have that lying around either. But you can put several $1,000s each year. If you're not using it, you can actually invest it and let it grow for retirement, and then use it to pay Medicare premiums in retirement as well. But the one thing to note is if you take money out of that account and it's not for eligible medical expenses before age 59 and a half, there's a 20% penalty. And so that's twice what the retirement account penalties are. So you just need to be aware of that. But it is a great tax savings vehicle if you have a high deductible health plan and you're eligible for that. So eligibility for that is based on the type of health plan you have. There's another kind of account that works similarly that's often offered as an employment benefit, and that's a flexible spending account. But that's not quite as good because it has the same tax benefits where you can put money in tax-free and take it out tax-free, but you have to use the money within the year. And so you need to be able to estimate with some degree of accuracy how much you're going to spend on healthcare expenses that year. And then you only want to put that much money in, because if you put in too much money and you don't spend it, then you lose the money because you start from scratch each year. And so in that way, the flexible spending account isn't as valuable as the health savings account. And you have to be a lot more careful with it. And they have that for medical expenses, but there's also a flexible spending account for dependent care. So that would be daycare, childcare, basically. But to use it, you have to be working during the time your children are in childcare. But employers can offer a flexible spending account where you can put some money in tax-free and then use it to pay for your childcare costs tax-free as well. And so that's everything that falls under the healthcare title there. Next, we have life insurance. Now, if you have anyone who depends on your income, then you probably need life insurance, because if you pass away, your income will be gone, and those who are left behind are going to be in trouble without your income. So life insurance is an income replacement, or, it helps replace income. If you pass away, your beneficiaries get some money to help them out while they adjust and figure out how to support themselves. And life insurance is another common employer benefit. Employers can offer up to $50,000 and it's completely tax-free for you. You don't have to pay any kind of taxes on it. But they can also offer more and you only have to pay taxes on the premiums. So if your employer offers you $400,000 of life insurance, you're not paying taxes on $350,000. You're just paying taxes on the premiums for that, which usually aren't a lot. And so having life insurance from your employer usually doesn't affect your taxes significantly. And a lot of employers, and I know the CBB plan, they offer 4 times salary. So you take whatever your salary is and 4 times that, and that's what benefit you'd get from your employer. And it's great if your church offers this, but it's also really good to purchase life insurance on your own outside of work. For one, it usually doesn't cost anything more. It's pretty comparable, so it's not cost prohibitive. You can go either way. But then also, if you leave your employer, you lose your employer provided life insurance. Whereas if you have it on your own, you can leave your employer, you can do whatever you want. As long as you keep paying those premiums, you still have that life insurance. So it's good to have life insurance, whether it's from your employer or outside your employer. Where it's the most valuable as an employee benefit is if you have health problems. Because if I go purchase a life insurance policy on my own today, they're going to do underwriting and they're going to check in on my health and see how healthy I am to see what the likelihood of me dying is. And then they're going to charge me premiums based on that. Or they might just say, I'm sorry, we don't want to insure you because we don't have a lot of confidence in your ability to survive, which nobody wants to hear. But with employer provided insurance, they don't look into your medical history. So if you do have medical problems, it can be very, very good to have employer provided insurance because you might not be able to get insurance elsewhere. And so that can be very, very valuable to get it through your employer. Next up, we have disability insurance. And during your working years, you're actually 4 times more likely to become disabled than you are to pass away. So disability insurance isn't as commonly known. Most people aren't as familiar with it, but it's incredibly important because you're more likely to need it and need to use it. And this is one where it's really good to get through your employer because it's really expensive outside of employment. And so if you can get your church to offer you disability insurance, I highly recommend doing so. I have a client who priced it out on his own and said, there's no way I can purchase that. So I'm gonna bother my church. And they said, maybe in 2 years we can do that. And so, you know, he has a 2-year gap there, but at least the church is willing to work with him there because after pricing it out, it was just way too expensive to purchase on his own. So if you don't have it, you can go get quotes, but you'll probably be better off getting your church to offer disability insurance. And it's really important when you have disability insurance to be familiar with the definition of disability and what does it mean to be disabled? Does it mean I can't, you know, be a minister anymore? Does it mean I can't work at all anymore? And so it's really good to be familiar with that and see what kind of policy it is because there's different kinds of policies with different disability definitions, and some are more valuable than others because it's easier to get depending on the definition of disability. And there's 2 different kinds of disability insurance. There's short-term and there's long-term. And if you have an emergency fund, you don't really need short-term insurance because, you know, you can self-insure for being out of work for 2 months. But everyone that has, you know, people depending on their income needs long-term disability insurance because there's probably not going to be as easy to self-fund being out of work for 2 years. So the short term, usually that's from 1 week to 6 months, what it covers. That's not as important as the long term, which covers usually about 6 months and can go all the way until your retirement age, because that's where you really get into trouble financially is if you're out of work for an extended period of time. So disability insurance is very important. It's good to have. It's great to get it through your church. So feel free to, you know, encourage them to offer that as a benefit. The next one I have on here is retirement savings. And this is one that is really good for your church to offer. Sometimes churches will say, well, we can't afford to put money into retirement for you, so we're not going to offer anything. And I would encourage you to tell them, please offer the 403B, even if you don't put anything in, so that I can put money into it. Because as clergy, having access to a church 403B is incredibly valuable for you. It's more valuable than any other workplace retirement plan for any other worker. And that's because of the incredible tax benefits. So first of all, any money that you put into your 403B pre-tax, it's not just you're not paying income taxes on it, you're not paying Social Security and Medicare taxes on it either. Now, if you work at Walmart and contribute to their 401k, you have to pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on everything you put into that 401k. But because of the way clergy are dual status taxpayers and the way you pay those Social Security and Medicare taxes, anything you put into your 403b, you're automatically saving 15% in taxes on by not having to pay those Social Security and Medicare taxes. And if that was it, that would be a great reason to make use of a 403b. But that's not all, because you can claim a housing allowance from your 403b in retirement. Now, this is only available with a church 403b retirement plan. If you've been funding an IRA, even if it's with your church compensation, because it's in an IRA, it's not eligible for housing allowance. It has to be in a church-sponsored retirement plan, such as a 403b. So what you can do is you can put money in there pre-tax, pay no income taxes, no Social Security, no Medicare taxes, invest it, it will grow, and then in retirement, you can take the money out tax-free for housing expenses. As long as it's housing expenses, it's tax-free. So that way you're not paying tax on the front end and you're not paying tax on the back end. And it's great tax benefit. Now, if you take money out of your 403b and it's not housing expenses, you just pay the normal taxes like you would if it were a traditional IRA. There's no penalty or anything. But having a church-sponsored 403b is a huge benefit that you should take advantage of, even if your church can't afford to put money in for you. But if they can, it's great to have your church put money in there for you as well. That's even better. But even if they don't, it's great to have that 403b. And if you are a married couple and you're both ministers, I would encourage you for both of you to contribute to your own 403bs, because only the person who the 403b is in their name can take a housing allowance at retirement. So if my husband and I were both in ministry and we only funded his 403b, then in retirement we could claim a housing allowance, but as soon as he passes away, I will inherit the money, but I won't be able to claim a housing allowance because it was in his name. And so if you have a couple where you're both in ministry, you should both be contributing to your 403b. And if you have questions about 403b or you want to know how to set one up through your church, that's CBB's expertise. They will help you with that. The next thing I have on here is paid leave. Now, this is one that a lot of ministers really miss out on. People just think, ministers can always serve. They never need a break. They just, can go on forever. But we all know that's not true. Even Jesus took breaks. Even Jesus, took time away, spent time alone, got away from the ministry. So it's really important for you to be able to do so as well. Because what happens is if you don't have any paid leave, then maybe you can't afford to leave without pay. And so you'll come to work sick. You'll get your whole congregation sick. You'll get your whole office staff sick. And it can be very unhealthy. And even just having mental health breaks and time off, you need that to be able to continue to minister and pour out to people. So I would encourage you to make sure you do have paid leave from your employer. And there are different kinds of paid leave. You can have, one of them is sick leave, which the pandemic taught us all how important that is. We don't want sick people in the office. Another one is holidays. Now, likely you're not going to have Easter and Christmas off, but you can have other days off to kind of counterbalance that. But having holidays is important so you can spend time with your family and rest just like your congregation does. And then vacations, that's important as well. Family leave, if you're having a child or need to take care of a sick family member, that's very important as well. And then professional development and ministry. Your church will benefit if you have the opportunity to grow as a minister and even to go outside of your church walls and minister in other places. Your church will benefit from that. So it's great if they will give you some paid leave in order to be able to do that. And then the last one is a sabbatical. And this is a great thing to have. I mean, sabbatical comes from the word Sabbath. This is God's invention, God's idea. Ask your church to get on board with it. And it's just a way to get away for a while and just really refresh yourself. And usually churches benefit a lot from that when their ministers have the opportunity to refresh themselves and have a sabbatical like that. And so those are just different kinds of paid leave. Some employers will have, you get this many days of sick leave, this many days of holiday, this much vacation, or they might just say, okay, this is your total number of days, use it however you want. Whatever works best for you, but the important thing is you do need to have some paid leave because you do need to be able to take time off, whether it's to refresh yourself or to heal. It's important to have that. The next thing I have on here is a parsonage. We've already mentioned a parsonage. Basically, this is a home that the church owns that you get to live in. And so the church owns the property. Often the parsonage is close to the church. That way you're easily accessible to the community and you don't have to pay anything to live there. Sometimes churches will pay utilities as well. Sometimes they don't. But either way, the church owns the building itself. Now, a parsonage is something where you do not have to pay any income taxes on the value of your parsonage, but you do have to pay Social Security and Medicare taxes. So every year you need to look and say, okay, if I were a complete stranger renting this house just the way they provided it to me, what would I pay in rent? And then whatever you would pay in rent that year, you have to add that back to your income on Schedule SE and pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on it. Now, this is one where I see a lot of people making mistakes on their taxes. A lot of people don't realize this, and so they don't pay those taxes on their parsonage. But legally, you are required to. And so you need to calculate each year, okay, how much is this parsonage worth? You know, whatever utilities they pay, what the rent would be if someone else were renting it, and then include that on Schedule SE and pay those Social Security and Medicare taxes. If you are someone who didn't know that, I'm sorry, you will have to pay higher taxes, but you'll also get higher Social Security benefits. So that's the benefit of that. And then the last thing I have on here is tax withholding. Usually you wouldn't think of that as a benefit. It's just something that employers do. But churches actually have the option. They're not required to withhold taxes. So because they're not required to, it's actually a benefit if they do. Because there are churches who don't withhold any taxes. And then you have to make quarterly estimated payments where you get onto the IRS's website and send in money and have to track what you actually paid so that you can check. And because sometimes the IRS will come back and say, oh, you didn't pay anything. And it's like, no, I did. I'm speaking from experience here. This happened to me personally. I paid estimated payments under my own Social Security number. And then when I filed my taxes, the IRS said, oh, no, you didn't pay this. And I said, oh, yes, I did. And when I called, they said, oh, well, it's because it was under your Social Security number and not your husband's. They're like, next time, just pay under your husband's Social Security number. I was like, you know, it's kind of illegal to use someone else's Social Security number. But we got it all worked out. And so having your church withhold taxes is actually a big benefit because then you don't have to make those quarterly payments. And they're only allowed to withhold income taxes. But like I said before, when you pay your taxes at the end of the year, like right now when you're filing your tax return, your Social Security and Medicare and income taxes are all lumped together into one tax bill. And so if you have them withhold extra income taxes, that can cover those other taxes, and then you don't have to pay any quarterly payments. So that's actually a really good benefit that you can have. Another benefit people have mentioned that isn't on here, it's not as common, but leasing a car. If you're in the kind of ministry where you're doing a lot of driving, maybe you're in a rural area where you're driving to even multiple churches and visiting people and doing a lot of driving, sometimes churches will lease a car for the pastor's benefit, and that can be really beneficial as well. So that's the benefits. We've talked about income, we've talked about benefits. Now we're going to touch on reimbursements just briefly. And this is something where it's not really income because you're just getting paid back for something that you paid already. But if it's not set up properly and your church pays you back for things, then that's taxable income for you. So it's really important that you have these reimbursement accounts set up properly. So for business expenses, and this would include mileage and gas for going and traveling to see your parishioners. For business expenses, you need to have an accountable reimbursement plan. That's the official IRS language. So if you Google accountable reimbursement plan, you'll get information on how to set one up, what the rules are. It's not very hard. They aren't very strict rules. It's just things like showing receipts, not giving someone a bunch of cash way ahead of time, you know, just having accountability for the money. But if you have one of these reimbursement plans, then you can be reimbursed, and those reimbursements are tax-free for you. And then we already kind of mentioned this, the healthcare expenses with a healthcare or a health reimbursement arrangement. Again, that's the official IRS language, so you can Google that. And that's just where they will reimburse you for healthcare expenses, and it's not income to you. And so if you spend money on these things and you want reimbursements and not have it be taxable income for you, then you'll have to set up one of these IRS approved plans. Now we'll go to the next slide. And this is kind of just bringing it all together because it's like, okay, so you've said all these things. What does this really mean? And so this chart breaks down all the different things I just talked about, and if it's subject to federal income tax or if it's subject to SECA taxes, which is Social Security and Medicare taxes. And so this is a good cheat sheet where you can see the two of them. But this is also a good example of why it's really helpful if some of these benefits are provided by your employer, rather than them just giving you a lump sum and say, okay, buy it all on your own. Because, for example, health insurance, if your employer provides it, you're not paying any taxes. If you're buying it on your own, you are paying taxes. And so if you're, let's say you're in the 12% federal tax bracket, you have to pay the 15.3% of Social Security Medicare taxes. Let's say you have 5% state tax. That's over 32% in taxes that you're saving by getting it through your employer rather than purchasing it on your own. So that's why this is important to know the taxation, so that when you're talking to your employer, because it's easier for them to just say, okay, we're going to give you $80,000, do whatever you want with it. That's just easier for them. But it's more beneficial for you to get certain benefits through them for tax purposes. And the next slide gives a sample of your compensation package. And I guess I should have mentioned the chart in the last slide and this, they're both in the minister's compensation guide, which is available online, and they're going to put a link in the chat so you can look it up and use that. And that can be really great to provide to your church, provide to the people who are making these decisions so they can learn more about it as well. But for example, for a compensation package, instead of them just giving you a lump sum, something like this where you have salary and then you have your housing allowance where you're not paying any income taxes on it, Social Security offset, this is them recognizing your extra tax burden and helping with it, and then health insurance, tax-free if you get it through your employer, retirement contributions, huge tax benefits there, no Social Security Medicare taxes, you can claim a housing allowance in retirement, then life and disability insurance, where you're getting some of that tax-free as well. And then those reimbursable expenses. If they just give you the money and say, okay, use it however you want in your car or conferences and books, then you're paying tax on that money. Whereas if they have an accountable reimbursement plan, they say, okay, give us the receipts and we'll pay you for that. Then you're not paying any taxes. So it's really important to understand all of this because it can make a big difference on your taxes. And if you need follow-up for this, use that compensation guide. It's a great resource. It's something you can send to members of your church who are making these decisions, because a lot of people that just, work in the secular world, they don't understand all these unique aspects for clergy. So even the fact that you pay twice as much in Social Security and Medicare taxes, most people don't know that. So whoever you have on the board making salary and compensation decisions needs this information. So you can send them this webinar, or you can send them that compensation guide, and that will really help as you negotiate and figure out compensation. That's all for today.
Wow, Amy, thank you. That was an incredible amount of information, and always learn something new every time we have this seminar. So thank you so much. We won't have a pop quiz today for all of those who are here, but we do want to recommend that you explore the Minister's Compensation Guide. That link is in our chat. And as Amy has already said, this is such a great tool for ministers, church finance committee, personnel, even search committees. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to end the recording now and move into our question and answer time.
Yeah, so if anybody